Hello and welcome to Glasgow Doors Open Days Digital Festival. This event will a brief housekeeping message. So that you can get the most out of this session, we'd like to point out a few features of Zoom. By clicking on the buttons at the bottom of the Zoom window, you will be able to access the chat room, and if you are in a webinar, you will also be able to make use of the Q&A function. The Q&A function is so that you can ask specific questions of the speaker, which they will be able to answer time allowing at the end of the session. Use the chat room to contribute more generally to the discussion or to share links and resources. When using these features, please mind your P's and Q's. Both will be monitored and recorded. Most sessions will be recorded and uploaded to Glasgow Doors Open Days Festival YouTube channel and website. If you're in a meeting, please make sure you keep your microphone on mute unless otherwise directed by the host. If for some reason the session ends unexpectedly or you lose connection, please just click the link again and wait to be let back in. Similarly, if the host loses connection, please bear with us. We will do our best to manage any connection issues as and when they occur, and may contact you by email if necessary. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'd love to hear about your experience of our digital festival. Fill out our survey to be in with a chance of winning a prize. Our survey is available at www.glasgowdoorsopendays.org.uk/survey. We hope you enjoy this event.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us on this Saturday afternoon for our Glasgow Doors Open Days 2020 presentation. It is, of course, Secrets of Glasgow's Unfinished Inner Ring Road. For those of you who don't know much about the Glasgow Motorway Archive, I'm Stuart Baird. I'm the chair of the organisation, and I'm joined by John Hassel here, who's the secretary. Together, we're going to run through a few slides. We're going to start sharing our screen in just a moment, and we hope you enjoy this presentation that we've lined up. We've got lots of new material to share. John, I'm sure you would agree with that.
Yeah, this is one of our biggest presentations, I think. We've got quite a lot on there, loads more photos.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to say our thanks as well to the Glasgow Doors Open Days team for allowing us to participate again this year in what has been a strange year, I'm sure, for everyone. It's nice to be able to have a digital offering that people can still come along and see. So on that note then, I think we'll just get straight into it. John, what do you say?
Yeah, I think we should.
Actually, if you don't mind, I'll just briefly introduce myself too. My name is Wojciech, and I'm also part of the Glasgow Motorway Archive. I'm here to moderate the event, and I'll also be taking note of any questions you may have, which you can put either into the chat or the Q&A function, which you will find towards the bottom of your screen. I will be forwarding those to Stuart and John, and they will answer your questions during the Q&A section at the end of the event.
Okay, thanks, Wojciech. Yeah, as Wojciech says, we will be answering questions at the end. It is obviously a 45-minute presentation, very brief, really, in terms of the overall.
Considering the amount of stuff we have to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a broad overview of the inner ring road. So bear with us for that. Okay, right then. Okay, so this presentation is about the Glasgow Inner Ring Road. Now, that's not a term that's used very common.
It's not on the road signs anymore.
You don't see it anymore. So a lot of people may not be familiar with what that actually is. So we've prepared this schematic. The black line there basically shows the M8 motorway going through the city centre. You can see the various contract names there as well. So like Kingston Bridge, Charing Cross, Woodside Town Head. So that's the name that the contracts were as it was constructed. And we'll refer to those as we go through the presentation. Likewise, there's the unbuilt section, which probably most of you are here to hear about today, and that's the east flank and the south flank. So we use these terms quite a lot in our presentations, and we hope this schematic at least helps you get your bearings just a little bit as we go through.
It's a jargon buster, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So when you think about unique architecture in Glasgow, most of you are probably thinking of Kelvin Grove, maybe even the City Centre, City Chambers. But did you realise that Glasgow's motorway system is actually very unique, not just in a UK context, but in a European context and in an international context? It combines elements of systems from all over the world with a definite American influence. And that has basically resulted in Glasgow ending up with this urban motorway system that isn't unlike anything seen anywhere else.
Yeah, and it's important the emphasis on the word system, because it is probably the most complete system in a city in the UK.
That's right, yeah. It is. We have more miles of urban motorway in Glasgow than in all the other UK cities. So yeah, we have an interesting thing here, and that's kind of the point of the Glasgow Motorway Archive. We preserve records relating to this rather extensive network that was built in a very short period of time through the 1960s and 70s, because it is unique and because a lot of people want to know about it, and it's still a key part of the city's transportation system. So, you know, that's the kind of main reason there. So that schematic hopefully has enabled you to get your bearings. Okay. Now, we will be using some annotations as we go through, and we'll have a small pointer, which you will see on the screen. So you'll see the red dot there. So when we're trying to make a particular point, just look for that. All right. In terms of what we're going to cover, we're basically taking you through 80 years of Glasgow road history. The origins really start in the 1930s and 40s. Then we're going to look at comprehensive development through the 1950s. The planning and design element will then kick in, which looks at the first kind of half of the 1960s, and then construction takes us through the latter half of that decade and into the 70s. We'll then focus on the south and east flanks and the real battle that there was to try and get them built, and that roughly covers the period from about 1970 to 1980. Later proposals will cover the period after that, and then we'll do a bit of analysis as well about what worked, what didn't work, and the general impact of the system in the city, because as we know, it's still divisive even 50 years later.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, and we see that in our engagement with people. Okay, so taking us back to the origins then. The city was already thinking about new proposals for roads as early as the 1930s. We've unearthed some research recently that looked at suggestions for a new river crossing in the Finnieston area. There was always mention of a potential tunnel as well down at White Inch, which eventually became the Clyde Tunnel. And other new roads were being proposed as part of the general trend of building new housing in the interwar period. So, you know, so some of the new houses that were built in the south and in the northwest of the city in that interwar period, there were new wider boulevards and dual carriageways that came along as part of that.
That's right.
So improved roads, you know, improved in the sense of being better than what they had been through the Victorian era, was something that was always on the city's agenda. But it was really the mid-1940s before any real concrete proposals came forward. And they came in the form of the first planning report of 1945, which was produced by city engineer Robert Bruce. Now, the war had obviously got in the way a bit there, and that kind of held back any definitive progress through the 30s and 40s. Okay. Now, when we talk about the first planning report, and this slide here kind of sums it up, most people know about the proposals for the city centre. And if you look at the image on the right of your screen there, you'll see this rather utopian looking new modern city centre with all the old buildings cleared away and the grid system changed, and all these large concretey looking buildings that have been thrown up with this inner ring road around it. That's what most people know about the first planning report, about the Bruce report. But what a lot of people don't realise is that actually that report laid the groundwork for what we have in Glasgow today. Our modern transportation system grew from the initial report. Now you see the slogan there at the bottom of the front cover, John. The voice of time cries out to man, advance. Now, the whole report really emphasises that there's aspects of the city that's in decline, that the housing conditions in many areas are very poor, that, you know, urban density is quite bad, and that journey times and congestion and things are even a problem in the city centre at that point. So Bruce basically went ahead and devised a system of roads that he felt would work and take the city forward, because the city centre's road system had been designed for the horse and cart. So if we move on to the next slide, we can actually see Bruce's roads proposals. John's going to give you a bit of an overview of those.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. Just going to go back to that previous slide very quickly, and you can actually see this road system has a series of roundabouts around the city, and this is what you see in these parts here. Although this is a rough outline of the roads that were proposed in Bruce as a new road system for the inner core of the city, the actual junctions weren't decided upon the time. And if you look at the top here, you can see a kind of a red dot within the circle. These were meant to be hubs. Within the Bruce report, Stuart's got some fantastic illustrations showing like a railway interchange with a road interchange and things like that.
Yeah, indeed. And if you look at the Inner Ring Road article on our website, which is glasgows-motorways.org.uk, you can actually see more of these illustrations, which just gives you a bit of a background as to how the Inner Ring Road came about. So if you're interested more in those origins, you can read about them on that page.
Yeah, because as Stuart says, it comes from this report. Now, moving over to the image here that we have on the left, okay? So this was the city centre as it was at the time, and there's two types of routes. They've got red, which is the arterial routes that they proposed, and they have orange, which is the sub-arterial ones. Now, most of these are on existing streets and alignments. It was a case of, you can see Great Western Road there, you can see Edinburgh Road here, and you can see so that's Paisley Road West going on there. So the case is taking these roads and upgrading them. However, in some cases, particularly this inner ring road, this would be a completely new road up here that we can see. And also these sections here, which is now forms part of the kind of west flank. Although the east side, it was proposed that it would just go down High Street and be kind of upgraded as there. As I said before, this was just a broad overview, a look. They hadn't really decided the final and ultimate form, how wide this would be in these images here. So we can move on to the next slide.
Yeah. So it was often said in Bruce's report that really some of the most feasible proposals that he made were actually about the road system.
Yeah.
You know, there was widespread criticism of his proposals for the city centre and for other aspects, although some of the satellite housing schemes and things that he proposed ultimately went forward.
Yeah.
In terms of moving forward with the roads proposals, Glasgow Corporation didn't have a lot of money, and they also had a number of things that they wanted to look at with regards the Inner Ring Road. So they prioritised the construction of the Clyde Tunnel, which was approved in 1948 and eventually taken forward in the later 1950s. So the Inner Ring Road actually kind of had to wait. That tied in with the city's general thinking, because they wondered how they were going to move forward with the transportation in the city centre, because they had the idea that other things were going to have to happen, you know, housing, demolition, all that sort of thing. And as we moved into the 1950s, that started to take shape. Now, the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act of 1947 introduced the concept of comprehensive development and comprehensive development areas. Now, what these areas are and what that allowed for was the complete demolition and clearance of everything within an area, within a boundary, that would then be completely rebuilt and replaced with modern infrastructure, modern facilities, modern schools, modern shops, all of that sort of thing.
And roads.
And roads, crucially, yeah. Now, there was also the requirement for the corporation and other local authorities across Scotland to come up with new structure plans and development plans. And Glasgow Corporation grasped this opportunity for comprehensive development, which was happening all across Britain. Now, money was made available by the Scottish Office, in the case of Scotland, to take forward these proposals. And it lay at the corporation's feet to come up with their proposals, and they ultimately came up with 29 comprehensive development areas across the city. These were then submitted to the Secretary of State for Scotland at the Scottish Office and approved. Now, what that did was it removed the need for single compulsory purchase orders and various other parts of legislation that was used traditionally to move forward. I mean, if you think of, you want to make, have a major redevelopment of an area now, there's a whole process that needs to be followed, and it would probably be done in a piecemeal fashion. What comprehensive development allowed for was the complete demolition of everything in one go and the acquisition of all the property and the land. But they obviously wanted to, they grasped that and wanted to move forward with that. Okay, so moving on to this next slide. Comprehensive development, as I say, is a big thing. And in Glasgow, a lot of people, I think, don't quite realise or appreciate that comprehensive development actually came first. A lot of people think that the motorway is the primary reason that most areas were cleared. So Townhead and Woodside, Anderston Cross in particular. But it was comprehensive development areas that ultimately created and approved. And if you look at the two images on the right-hand side of your screen there, you can see the boundaries of the comprehensive development area at Townhead in the top right, and at Anderston Cross in the bottom left. Now, if I just move the pointer across the screen, now everything within that area at Anderston was earmarked for wholesale demolition and clearance. Now, what that allowed for was the corporation at this time in the 50s to think about, okay, if we're going to have this empty land, where can we fit in our new roads? Because there's no point in us trying to build a road through an existing area if comprehensive development is going to allow for clearance.
Because they're demolishing it anyway. Yeah,
that was exactly thinking. So that's the kind of general thinking there. Now, during the 50s, there was a bit of progress towards the inner ring road, but really not much, because the city couldn't quite decide on the priorities for its comprehensive development proposals. When you've got 29 of them and there's only limited money available, you need to start prioritising where you want to start first. And that kind of delayed things a bit, particularly through the 1955 development plan, the structure plan. And it was only really when the revisions came in 1959 that we had proper concrete proposals. Now, John, talk about this image on the left, because this was devised as part of the corporation's study into the ring road in the 50s.
That's right. Thanks, Stuart. This diagram with the different colours on it shows what direction traffic is coming from and it's where it's ending up. So just to take red for an example, we're seeing these are the routes that are coming from the south, and you can see these lines thicker. In a kind of layman's terms, means more traffic that's using it, and these get thinner as they pass through the city, and the traffic comes off at junctions and so forth. What they found by looking at all these things, a lot of the traffic was converging on the city centre, but also bypassing the city centre. Yes, people were going into the city centre. I would say people needed to do that because at that time, particularly Glasgow, had quite a lot of industry within these central areas. But a lot of this traffic was actually going straight in and out, as we can see with these red lines here and with the blue as well, coming through and then across. I mean, people coming through from Edinburgh side and going all the way out that way. That is right through the city centre. Yeah,
so I mean, crucially, the nature of the Glasgow road system at that time was that all of the major A roads converged in the city centre.
Yeah.
There wasn't really any high quality A roads that were out with the city centre that were used for primary, directions across the city. So if you were travelling along the A8 and you wanted to go from Greenock to Edinburgh, you had to go through Glasgow city centre, to get through it. It was as simple as that. Okay, there was one or two roads outside it, but they weren't to particularly high standards.
No, they wouldn't what you would call a bypass.
No,
now,
exactly. So really, Glasgow had this problem where there was a lot of traffic in the city centre that actually didn't need to be there. So one of the primary justifications for an inner ring road was that they would be able to send all this traffic around the city centre. Now, from there, we actually moved on to the corporation's own proposal for the ring road, John, didn't we?
Yeah, the corporation looked at Bruce's proposals in the slides you've seen earlier with this kind of apple shape road outside the city centre, and they started refining it. So now we actually see what the junctions are going to look like. So this was the corporation's go at doing that. So if you look up here, just to give you a perspective, so north, obviously that way, you can see the Clyde, and that is Townhead. Townhead does not look like that now, although that's where that was. A lot of roundabouts were proposed within this. Now, this was the kind of 1950s, and these were roundabouts. Really, you started seeing them appearing in the UK a lot. So they were all the thing. However, it is not actually continuous. We use a term what we call grade separation, which is where junctions are at a different level and the main line can carry on through uninterrupted, which is what you see on a motorway. You never have to stop at traffic lights or a roundabout, except in this proposal you did. So kind of using existing streets, and suddenly had a kind of a gyratory system here. This would have been for Argyle Street and presumably for the expressway down here and down at the bottom to tie in here some kind of version of Kingston Plantation down there, and going through, but basically connecting with major roads from either side, which is where the existing M8 is down here near Plantation, and also up here as well, where you can see Springburn Road.
And crucially there, you can see that the north side of that ring road has been brought south in this proposal. So it's actually much closer to Cathedral Street than the existing M8 that we know today. And there is a reason for that, which we're going to cover as we move forward to the next slide.
Okay.
Which takes us into the planning and design era. So in 1959, as I say, we finally have some concrete proposals. The corporation knows that its priority CDAs are going to be Townhead, Woodside, Anderston Cross, Tradeston, all these sorts of areas, Gorbals, all the ones in the immediate vicinity of the city centre are going to be the priority. Now, they now realise, okay, now we know where we're going to clear everything, we need to determine where the road's going to go so that we know where we can put the houses and the schools and the colleges and everything else round about. And they moved pretty quickly. And in February 1960, they appointed Scott Wilson, Kirkpatrick and Partners, who were a London-based traffic engineering firm and consultancy who had the necessary skills and the people working for them who could actually design urban roads, modern urban roads, because there were not a lot of urban motorway designers or urban road designers in Scotland or Glasgow at that time. So Scott Wilson were appointed in February 1960. Alongside them was Halford and Associates. Now that was Professor Sir William Halford, who was a renowned architect, and his firm were basically appointed by the corporation to ensure that any proposals being made by the engineers would fit nicely with the surrounding landscape and townscape. Okay, and we'll talk a bit about that as we go through some of the photos that are coming up. Basically, they had final say on what was constructed. So everything had to have a high standard of finish. And that's kind of what set Glasgow out from some of the other cities. As I say, the Glasgow system is quite unique in a UK context. Now, Scott Wilson were asked to look at the traffic prediction. So they were going to revisit traffic predictions. At that time, traffic was growing by something like 8% a year. Glasgow was one of the few cities in Britain that saw traffic continue to grow in the period from 1939 to 1949. So, the traffic problems in the city centre particularly were really quite bad, as were the main approaches, Alexandra Parade and Paisley Road West. They were also very congested routes. It was clear something had to be done, and this comprehensive development option enabled that. So they also had to look at the inner ring road's geometric design. Basically, they had to decide where it was going to go. They took the corporation's 1950s plan and looked at it and decided, okay, is this feasible? Should we make changes? What might those changes be? They were also asked by the corporation to ensure that it enabled quick and easy access to the central area. So they wanted quite a few junctions on it. So you had to be able to get into all parts of the city centre quickly and, likewise, quickly get out of them as well. And that was something else that was looked at. In addition to that geometric design, Scott Wilson were also given the detailed design of the north flank. So that was the section from Townhead to St George's Cross. So that also included things like the bridges and the structures and the road, the type of roads that was going to be constructed, in terms of was it concrete, was it, bitumen macadam, all that sort of thing. Similarly, Fairhurst and Partners, they were also appointed in 1960, but specifically to look at what was then known as the Carnoustie Street Bridge. Now, the Carnoustie Street Bridge was first outlined as part of Bruce's Inner Ring Road proposal in 1945. You saw the new crossing over the river. And Carnoustie Street was a name that stuck with it up until really about 1962-63, at which time it was decided that an urban motorway would be built. And because it would be a high-level crossing of the river, the Carnoustie Street name didn't really apply. And that was when it was changed to Kingston Bridge. We'll show you a bit about that. Fairhurst commission was later extended to include the rest of the west flank as well. So they designed the bridges and structures through the Charing Cross section that we know of. Now, Scott Wilson got to work immediately. We've got a photo there in the top left of that slide showing a traffic study underway in 1960. Basically, the only way they could do it in those days was roadside surveys. So they would set up a cordon of the city. So in the case of the Ring Road, all the main points coming into the city centre would have a survey done in them. And in the case of that one, that's Alexandra Parade, just east of Wishart Street. So you can see there's police there. There's a number of people doing surveys. They would flag down vehicles, ask them where you've come from, where you're going, and how often you do that to try and determine prediction levels for traffic flows going forward. And once they had completed all these surveys, that enabled them to make a prediction of what traffic would look like at 1990, which was the year that the corporation wanted the road system designed to. So it had to accommodate traffic flows at that time. Now, if you look at the lower right-hand image, you can see the traffic prediction flows for the Inner Ring Road. And the first thing that kind of screams out to you there is that the Charing Cross section was always going to be the quietest corner of the Inner Ring Road. Okay, The southeast corner, around about the east flank, south flank, that was going to be the busiest. Okay, now that's important, because when we come on to talk about the south and east flanks and the outcomes later, it'll become apparent why that became a problem. And as you can see in the bottom left, there was a lot of media interest in this. You know, this was not something that, that Glasgow had ever done before. All this redevelopment and the plans for new roads and demolition of housing, you know, garnered a lot of attention. People in that time, and it's difficult to imagine now because the last 10, 20 years or so have not been the greatest, unfortunately. But if you were living in that post-war time, it was very optimistic. It was looking to the future, and these changes, although rather drastic looking to us, to people living in those conditions, actually was seen as this massive leap forward.
A move forward to go suddenly from having houses where you didn't have an indoor toilet to having one that had an indoor toilet, but it meant obviously people were moved to different areas.
Yes, moved to the satellite schemes, which is a whole other issue, obviously, that we appreciate. Top right there, you can see some congestion on Alexandra Parade. And we have to remember that at that time, Alexandra Parade was the main route to Edinburgh from Glasgow and the west. So, you know, there was a lot of traffic, tens of thousands of vehicles using that road every day.
So the amount of heavy goods vehicles always stands out to me in these images that would have been going through the city centre.
Yeah. Okay, so on the next slide, as part of their study, by 1962, they had produced an interim report, which basically said to the corporation, yeah, we recommend you build this new road as an urban motorway. So restricting the types of traffic that could use it. So it would be completely separated from pedestrians and cyclists. Their reason for that was they felt that it would provide an adequate bypass and distributor for traffic crossing the conurbation, but also that looked to bypass the city centre, while crucially providing that quick link and access to it as well. Now, they considered a number of alternatives on the way there. In the top left, you can see some of these, John. Is there any of those that stand out for you?
Well, looking at these ones here, this is the one they more or less went with. But they did look at some alternatives that we see here of the ring road. So this is the, you know, the unbuilt, that's High Street you can see on that line there. But they did think about moving this east flank much further out. On these ones here, you can see an exaggeration of the corner up at St. George's Cross, and other ones here where it kind of comes in a bit more, and the way Anderson. I mean, they were looking at ways of how could we put it through areas with mitigating impact to other areas. So they did look at lots of different options while doing it.
That's right. And I mean, once the comprehensive development areas were approved by the Secretary of State, they were very difficult to change without going through the whole process again. Now, there have been public inquiries in some cases as well. So the corporation basically said to the engineering team behind the Inner Ring Road at Scott Wilson, you must, where possible, fit within the comprehensive development area boundaries. You know, so they were told, really, the road, you can have alternatives, and you see some of them there, but those that extended out with the boundaries would be much more difficult to take forward quickly. And the money in the budget was available, and the corporation were keen to move quickly. So in 1963, we had the approved plan on the right-hand side that you see there for the ring road. And John, one of the things that stands out for me, and I remember one of the engineers behind it telling me about it, was that the north flank was pulled north of Townhead. Now, as we showed earlier, the Townhead comprehensive development area was huge, and everyone knows there was a lot of clearance went on there. But the engineers felt that it was sensible to take the road north of the Townhead residential areas and run it along the former industrial areas and along the line of the canal, because it was felt, they knew the canal was going to be, you know, decommissioned anyway, it was going to be covered over. So it was felt that actually keep the road to the north of the new residential area rather than creating this potential new severance in there. And that actually had the effect of reducing the overall cost and the impact of that section as well. Anything else that stands out for you on that one?
Well, one thing we can look at here from the kind of crude inner ring road that we've seen a few slides ago with the roundabouts on it, you can see now this is something that's far more consistent with a motorway. We gone on the roundabouts, and what they now have is a full free flow grade separated junctions, multi-level in areas to make sure that the road basically you could go through it uninterrupted. So you can see a much larger interchange here at Townhead. We can also see that the connecting road, which became the Monkland motorway, which is the M8 from junction 15 all the way out to Baillieston, is actually up at Townhead and not further down here. So they've moved that up there as well. These connections that you see down here, this would have been the Hamilton motorway, the M74, which as we know came in at Plantation now, and up here we can see Mary Hill motorway, which you can still see the kind of stubs on, and we'll expand on that a little bit more as we go on in the slides. But yeah, completely kind of free flow now.
Okay, now this ring road was actually approved by the Corporation Planning and Highways Committee in 1963, so that enabled them to move forward and actually start to do some detailed design. John, we've got some visualizations here.
I really like these, because back then, to try and present these to the public, it was very different how we do it now, where we have visualizations and fly-throughs for modern road schemes, as they had to commission an artist, Alexander Duncan Bell or Sandy Bell, to draw up what the road was to look like. And he produced lots of these images, and we're going to share some of the best ones with you here. So this one up at the top here, this color one, shows this is actually the unbuilt east flank of the inner ring road, and that's Town Head. And this here is the Glasgow Royal Infirmary. So to give you your bearings, and that's north towards Springburn. On the right here, this actually shows what was going to be the south flank of the inner ring road. This is kind of heading towards the Gorbals area here, where it turns and goes over.
That's the Lauriston area.
Yep. Lauriston, that's it. And down here, this is one of the sections that did actually get built, and this was in front of the Mitchell at the Charing Cross Canyon. You can see it's not that far off, is it, Stuart, what they've done? And they've got this building over the top, which of course is now Tay House. It looks a little bit different. Down here, this is my favorite one on the bottom right. This is Kingston Bridge. This is looking north. And this was, of course, done well before they built the Hilton Hotel in the early 1990s or whatever it was. But they were pretty close, pretty accurate with that. And even showing the gantry design, very space age.
And then from there, they actually developed models. Halford and Associates helped them to build some 3D models that could be used at public exhibitions, again, just to assist the public and the politicians to see, you know, how is this going to look when it's all built in the 3D.
That's right. It's all very well looking at maps and visualizations, but you need a perspective on really how it fits in with the environment, particularly when you're looking at elevation. This is the Charing Cross Canyon, and it shows it going through there with the building, which is Tay House over the top. Stuart was saying about the Carnoustie Street Bridge, which became Kingston Bridge, showing it there. So, and at the bottom, this is a different perspective on Town Head, actually. So looking there, you can just see the Royal Infirmary at the bottom of the image there, and how it was going to tie in there.
Yeah.
So there's lots of these images. We have loads of them. Recently on social media, we showed all the ones that they have for the plans for Great Western Road. Yeah. So that was good. So we'll move on to the next slide. Okay. Which is your construction.
Yeah. So once everything was approved, it was then a case of moving forward with the construction. And as we showed earlier, the 4 priority contracts would take the M8 through the north and west side of the city centre. So construction really spanned the period from December 1965, when it started at Town Head, and was completed in February 1972, when the section through Charing Cross was completed. Now, in terms of budget, it cost £25 million in total at that time to build all of it, and that's from Kingston Bridge all the way around to Town Head. Now that works out at roughly £350 million today, so a significant expense, being ploughed in there. Now, crucially, 75% of the cost of these projects was met by the Scottish Office, and that was the same with the comprehensive development areas as well. They were the primary funder of all of this. There was a lot of money available at that time in the early 1960s, so the grant assistance was there, and all local authorities were keen to grab as much of it as possible. The corporation still contributed 25% of it, which today, in today's money, is still quite a considerable contribution. I think it's very unlikely that any of the local authorities in Scotland would be able to contribute that, at this time, today. 95% of the houses demolished, and there was over 4,000 properties demolished for the motorway, were deemed to be unfit for habitation. That's the corporation's words. They felt that they were beyond any sort of form of refurbishment. And crucially, there was no money available from the central government, Scottish Office, for refurbishment at that time. It was all for new properties, new build. And there was some demolition at Charing Cross, which was controversial. The Grand Hotel was lost. The St Andrews Ambulance Building was also lost, and there was a furniture warehouse gone as well that had been considered to be quite, well-regarded, nice buildings. They were lost as well. We'll cover that when we show some photos. Now, crucially, comprehensive development, demolition continued in many areas after 1972, particularly in the north of the city and round about Town Head and Anderston. A lot of people assume that the clearance was all done for the motorway and then there was nothing more after that. That's not true. In Woodside in particular, clearance was still going on as probably as late as 1975. And we did share an image recently on social media of New City Road, a couple of years after the motorway had opened, and New City Road still sitting there with all its shops, It's it's residential areas still there. Its retail facilities are all still there. So it did continue after that. Likewise at Anderston as well. There was a lot of clearance. So don't just assume that all the clearance happened because of the motorway. And this is something we come across this a lot. Everybody thinks the motorway through Glasgow was, that was the reason for all the clearance. Charing Cross, yes, it was. Unfortunately, that is the one area.
That is the exception, and we'll cover that when we talk about some of the images.
So we've got some photos here of the construction phase, and we're doing them in the order that they were constructed. So from Townhead, then to Kingston. So right. Townhead first. You can see the top left there. That's Castle Street, as it is at that time.
That's right.
Going under the
old corporation bus that we see in the photo there, isn't it? So yeah, that's fine. And we can see the construction. Townhead has got a lot of structures in it, so some of these ones being constructed here. But the most interesting is this aerial image that we see here, and it gives you the scale of the kind of whole area of redevelopment that they've done around here.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of clearance there.
Townheads, just so you know, guys, was built in several stages.
Yes, it was. Now, just to get your bearings there, where the marker is on the screen, that's the Baird Street Bridge. This is Royston Road coming up. So Baird Street comes up here, Royston Road goes straight ahead, and that's Castle Street coming up there.
Yeah.
All right, so lots of clearance. All of this here on the right was cleared later for new residential development, although there's one or two features still there. Okay, after that, we move to Kingston.
Yeah, so this image here, taken in the late 1960s, shows the Kingston Bridge, two sides really coming together. A good aerial photo there, and we can see just down here, this is actually the north approaches.
Yeah,
coming through.
Looking across. Crucially, should have said Townhead was built between 1965 and April 1968. Kingston was built between May 1967 and June 1970. Right. As you may remember, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Kingston Bridge just a few months ago, back in the summer.
That's right. One of the reasons as well, we didn't touch on this earlier, but Kingston was a high-level crossing, and it is to this day. It was built because of shipping at the time still needed to go underneath.
Yeah, and that kind of led to the method in which it was constructed using the free or balanced cantilever method. They spanned out across the river from each side, enabling the surface streets below and the river to remain open to traffic throughout the project.
Yeah.
That was quite innovative at the time. Now, a lot of people may not be aware that the Kingston Bridge is actually a number of hollow boxes tied together. And Transport Scotland, who also have an offering in Doors Open Days this year, have produced a video tour showing the inside of the bridge. So I recommend you go to the Transport Scotland website and actually look up that video, because it is a fascinating thing to see. You see Kingston Bridge in a way that you've never seen it before.
Yeah, it's good. I've managed to get inside and see it, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, Kingston Bridge was the most expensive of all the Ring Road projects as well, just £11 million.
A huge amount of structures that are actually on the north approach that you can see under construction here.
Yeah. Okay. That takes us to Woodside.
Okay, so Woodside, as you know, this section goes between Junction 17, Junction 16 towards Junction 15, and we've got a lot of elevated structures here. So the motorway, as I always hear people say, on stilts, but yeah, elevated motorway that you can see, and this is the view that, well, you can't see this anymore because there's a road on top of it now, but if we look on the right here, you can see these under construction, and these precast concrete beams were made right here. So they actually had a casting yard set up right next to the construction site, which made it was cheaper to do it that way. Yeah. The image down the bottom left here that you see, this is actually on the westbound carriageway, but looking east near at the Mary Hill stub, and that's actually Pinkston Power Station, which isn't there anymore.
And you can see the Stowe College building, now the School of Art building here on this one down in the right.
And there's Parliamentary Road, which we were talking about earlier.
New City Road. New City Road.
Oh, sorry, New City Road. Yeah, which is now completely different. It cuts underneath.
Yeah, there were some changes made down here. So rather than coming straight through, I think you turn here, don't you, and head to St George's Cross that way. Woodside was constructed between 1969 and 1971. And that was followed finally by Charing Cross, which, as we all know, was the most controversial of all the inner ring road contracts built. I'm sure the image on the left is probably quite shocking to some people when they see that.
What's interesting here is, as we said, this wasn't part of the comprehensive redevelopment area. This area had to be cleared for the road, and what dictated it is the topography. So this area that you look here, this is actually Garnet Hill, and this is a present day kind of junction 17 that you see here at St George's Cross with the loop. This is elevated ground here, and also over to the right, he's going towards Park Circus, is also elevated. So, I mean, it was the way of putting it through without very large deep cuttings or tunneling or anything like that put through. Just over there, you can also see it heading through Charing Cross at the time. Image on the right there, you can see the construction of the Charing Cross Canyon. It's something you just wouldn't see very much today with the live traffic in the streets right next to these excavations there. So different times. This is the contractor was Watlings.
That's right.
That they had there, and that's their site offices. But interestingly, the Mitchell was sort of something that was always kind of tucked away. This view recently kind of came out when when they managed to clear and put the motorway through, open the Mitchell out, so you can get that view there.
And I mentioned earlier that Glasgow was quite unique in adding a consulting architect to the proposals. One of the first things that Halfords insisted on was that the engineers put the motorway in cutting through that area rather than on stilts, which would have saved a considerable amount of money. Halfords were also responsible for the section in front of Charing Cross being capped over, so there is that short underpass there.
Yeah.
That was insisted upon by Halfords. It was way in excess of anything that was required in the standards at that time, but the corporation felt it was important because, people look back now and see, think urban motorways are, horrendous,
or ugly.
Halfords were trying, the corporation were keen to try and mitigate that as much as possible. And these things like landscaping, putting it in cutting, putting it in underpass, they were all things that were designed to make it better.
Absolutely, and importantly, keeping the junctions on only 2 level. Anything above that would be really, obtrusive.
Yeah, no huge flyovers that are very high.
Which you see in America, but not so much here.
Yeah.
So okay, so some aerial views that we've got here, and this is actually when the sections of the M8 had opened to traffic. So this section here is looking west from junction 15. So that's Townhead stage 1. So it looks different. What you can see here is Alexandra Parade, which basically fed on to the motorway there.
Yeah.
This ultimately was redirected and to the present day is here. This is where Glasgow Royal Infirmary is just now. A lot of this was cleared out not for the motorway but for the modernisation of Glasgow Royal Infirmary. And you see the old Alexandra Parade is just, it's just stubbed up there, and it's gone now. So that's where it goes just now. And you can see in the distance, we always mention that as a Kingston Power Station up there. The image on the right here, further along, this is junction 16. That's Dobby's Loan.
Yep.
Junction 16 is Portland Bass or Craig Hall, whatever you want to call it. Interestingly, you can see here, this is the Mary Hill stub to the never built Mary Hill motorway, which would have gone up here along Spears Wharf, along the canal.
And so lots of clearance there to the north of the motorway, you can see for the housing.
That's right.
In that area around about St George's Cross.
That's right. I mean, just going back to this left image, this area was also cleared for a new school as well. So it was schools, hospitals, not just roads, but also housing as well. Very green, Stuart. They planted a lot of trees.
Something like 30,000 trees planted, lots of green space. Again, that was all part of Halfords and the City Parks Department input to try and make it as nice looking as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
so we'll move on to these images. So this is at St George's Cross. So this was where we were talking about earlier, and this is what it looks like. Very nice over the 2 levels. John Cullen did say to me that this was the part he was most proud of, in terms of trying to get this to fit in with all of the vehicle movements accommodated. So you can see it going through there. On the right-hand side, this is completed. Now, this was obviously quite a few years ago. There's no Hilton. That's the BT house there. And you can see the Kingston Bridge, and this is looking south along here. Yeah. So anything else in these images?
Well, I always think it's crucial that to point out that the engineers were not just allowed to go away and do whatever they wanted. The city always accepted that there would be constraints on the number of vehicles and things that would be allowed either in the city centre or to use the motorway system. They knew it wasn't America. It specifically stated in many of the reports that traffic flows would be constrained to the levels allowed for in the ring road. There would be no future expansion of it because we had this historic city core.
Yeah, that's
now,
right.
That kind of led on to the south and east flanks, which I know is what most people probably want to hear about. So the north and west flanks of the M8 were built fairly quickly, fairly easily, without much controversy, other than, as I said, at Charing Cross. Now, the plan envisaged that the south and east flanks would be completed originally by 1980. Now, that traffic diagram we showed earlier showed you that side of the ring road was anticipated to be its busiest. That was where it was designed to send all the traffic. Okay, so they knew that by 1980, when traffic levels were starting to get quite high, the Charing Cross section in particular, that was quite slim in comparison to other parts, only 2 lanes each direction, say, they knew it was going to start to get congested, so they needed these other parts. But the plans for the east flank were controversial from the outset, and there were a lot of politicians and members of the public who complained and had concerns about the potential impact on Glasgow Green. That led to a lot of public engagement, okay? And the design was revised throughout the 1970s by Scott Wilson Kirkpatrick. Now, comprehensive development progress was slowing as well. There was sort of two reasons for that. They had got the primary satellite housing schemes built. Most people had been moved away from the areas of the city centre in the really poorest conditions. So when things started to move forward for other areas, the progress was slower. People weren't just as keen. Some people had seen areas like Anderston and Townhead and weren't entirely happy with it, politicians included, so the progress started to slow. And then, so that kind of led to a change of focus where we started to look at refurbishment of existing property rather than just wholesale demolition. That also had an impact. There were also other issues as well, like the oil crisis and financial crisis that came along that actually led to a reduction in traffic on the roads for a short period of time.
That's right.
But that led to a kind of a consideration of, are we doing the right thing here?
Where urban motorways were definitely all the rage, to put it that way, of the late 1960s, particularly when other schemes, like in London, when the Westway were built, a lot of people seen what this might look like, and the tide started to turn from the early 1970s.
And
there was
crucially,
opposition to
yes,
this,
the corporation was probably the biggest advocate of the south and east flanks, and in 1975 it was abolished and replaced by Strathclyde Regional Council as the roads authority. Housing and all the other aspects of comprehensive development at that time, other than planning, passed to Glasgow District Council, and there was a distinct change of focus between the two organisations about how they felt they should go forward. Now, what we're going to do now is, rather than discuss all these details through the 70s and the changes, we're going to look at the 1973 revisions. Now, that was the last time that really it was proposed as an extensive urban motorway part of the ring. That was 1973, it was published. Now, there was some revisions made from 1965 to 1973, and we're going to cover them in the next 4 slides, and it will show you how the alignment proposed was changed to try and make it more acceptable. And eventually they reached one that had broad local acceptance, although there were still people from outside that area that were unhappy. You know, organisations like the New Glasgow Society, others had real concerns about the impact in Glasgow Green and in the historic High Street.
So that's actually what you're looking at just now, just to give everyone a perspective of these images, because they are going to be the same. North is going that way. This is Glasgow Green, and you can see the People's Palace there and the River Clyde.
So this is the original proposal from the highway plan. And as you can see, you see the Glasgow Cross CDA boundary there. Okay, so the road is coming in a straight line from Townhead up here, all the way down across High Street, down across Salt Market, and then out across the other side. And this is the Hamilton motorway, or what we know as the M74 now coming in from the south, okay? Going in a straight line. So you can see there, Glasgow Cross is basically covered over by the motorway. Now, the toll booth steeple would still be there, but if you put it in context, if you think of the Co-op building at the south side of the Kingston Bridge, that's how close.
It's like that close, isn't it?
That's how close the motorway would have been to that. But everything east of there, including the Market building and all these buildings that we're well aware of, would all have been cleared and replaced with the motorway, an elevated motorway, I should add, and a number of new distributor roads around the bottom of it. Okay. Crucially here, number 2 is the St Andrew's Parish Church. It was more or less protected at that time by that proposal. The Barrowland was protected almost entirely, and they were looking at putting the section in front of the cathedral in an underpass, same as at Charing Cross.
Cut and cover tunnel.
So everything in the blue box there was going to be covered over, and they were going to create this plaza between the new Strathclyde University campus and the cathedral round about the Barony Church and in that general area. Okay, this was found to be completely unacceptable to most people, and that led to a slight revision in the later 60s, where they pulled it slightly further to the east. And you can see that there's the first kind of kink there that's just starting to be seen. Now, crucially, what had happened was the High Street Goods Yard station had closed, and that opened up a pocket of land that hadn't previously been available to the designers. So although this area was out with the CDA boundary, they were looking to have a lot of empty land there, and they were able to start utilising that. Now, public transportation was also being redevised and rethought out at this time. Now, that red curve there that we've included, that shows there is a proposed new railway line. That is Crossrail, okay? Crossrail was proposed as early as 1970, and as we know, the battle over that's still going on. But the corporation insisted that any revised proposals must allow for that chord on the railway to be constructed. So that's what that's showing there, okay? Now, Glasgow Cross is slightly in a better position from this one, and all other areas are basically the same, okay? That was not very well received, so that led to a further change, and that's this one, which is option 3. Okay, now this one had the effect of mitigating the impact on High Street and Glasgow Cross, and also saving more of Glasgow Green, but basically completely eliminated the Barrowlands. Okay, now number 4 here, 3A, this building here, that's the Barrowland Ballroom. Okay, so you can see the motorway would have been right against its
It's
back wall.
basically kissing distance from it.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay, and this is Gallowgate coming in here, or what would have been a change to Gallowgate. Although the dashed line here, we believe indicates that the line is basically to be determined by other studies.
That's right.
And that's the connections, you know, into the city centre as well.
Just to say on the key there, the yellow is surface streets, and the red being
The red being the motorway.
The problem with these plans is whatever way you try and do it, okay, we'll save High Street, but then you'll demolish something else.
Yeah.
There was no perfect way to do this.
No.
And because it was motorway to motorway, it required, you know, these large junctions and free flow.
Yeah. So that basically, as I say, saved Glasgow Cross and areas of the St Andrews Parish area. Better for Glasgow Green, but eliminated the Barrowland, and there was quite a lot of you know, property there that was deemed to be in acceptable condition. They weren't really advocating moving people out of there, so a lot of the residents get quite upset, and that led to this final proposal, which was accepted in 1973, which moved it further back from Glasgow Cross again, would have enabled the creation of a conservation area around the St Andrews Parish, saved most of the Barrowland area, and the ballroom is now nowhere near the motorway, but would still have had an impact on Glasgow Green. The section in front of the People's Palace here being placed in cut and cover tunnel, again like at Charing Cross, and grassed over. So yeah, you would still have had, you know, greenery at surface level, but the motorway would have been going underneath. This is roughly 300 metres long. Okay, so this is, it's kind of the best of.
It is. Can we address a question? A question's come through from somebody watching.
Okay.
And they do ask, you would think tunnels would have been a good idea, but too expensive. Boring tunnels, certainly, but cut and cover, not so much. If you're already clearing areas out and there's nothing above them, it's not as bad as having to bore a tunnel through something.
So I suppose in the case of Glasgow Green, yes, and ultimately something we're going to mention in a minute, cut and cover tunnels through the Green would have been very, you know, feasible. But you would need to have dug up all the ground first and then reinstated it. So, you know, you would have got the Green back, but yeah.
It's expensive when you're doing it on an existing street or buildings.
And put yourself in the context of the time, because in the view of the engineers and the corporation, they were already going way beyond what was required of them in planning legislation or any of these things, and they were spending a lot more money, you know. So if they had proposed all of it in tunnels at that time, that it would be way beyond what was considered reasonable.
You often see that now with future like High Speed 2 and everything. Everybody who lives along it wants it in a tunnel.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't keep all of the people happy all of the time.
Yeah.
So
this was the final approved motorway scheme for the east and south flanks of the ring road. It remained the corporation's desire to take this one forward. However, funding constraints meant that there was no progress made before local government reorganisation in 1975. And when Strathclyde came in, I think a lot of people saw an opportunity to rethink the proposals. The grant assistance, that 75% grant assistance that was made available to councils for a vast array of projects at that time, that was removed in 1975. Funding for local authorities has never been as extensive as that since.
No, they haven't.
So they really did have to rethink it, and that led to the general downgrading of the proposals, first in 1975 and then again in 1977, by which time basically it was only going to be an all-purpose dual carriageway.
So no more blue line. It means you can lower the standards and it won't upset as many people.
And then by 1980, basically they cut it short completely, which we're going to talk about in a moment. So some of these images here, John, what do you see there on the left? It's a model showing a vastly downgraded version of the whole thing.
Yeah, that's right. And you can see that the junction, particularly with the Hamilton motorway or Hamilton route as it would have been, it does actually, if I can have the pointer for a second, you can see it enters tunnel here under the green, but a much smaller footprint. For all of these junctions
and much further back from Glasgow Cross. I mean, you can see the circle that
it's pulling it out, but they decided to make have the whole thing more of as a feature, and that's where this bottom right image goes down, and it shows this large cable stayed structure that actually goes over the green and over the Clyde, and it would have a viewing tower or like a restaurant or something on the top of it.
Yeah, and you can see the model there as well. So briefly then, some of the later proposals, as I said, they cut it short. The section through the green was removed from policy completely after 1980. That led to the creation of the Townhead to London Road link, which would have dealt with some of the traffic issues around High Street and enabled some pedestrianisation. The Kingston Twin Bridges came later again again as well. So 2 new bridges on either side of the Kingston Bridge to take surface street traffic off the bridge and try and improve flow up there. And then ultimately the M74 Northern Extension was devised and built on an entirely new line that took it completely away from Glasgow Green and much further south to connect with the M8 plantation. So the Townhead link there, you can see it here on the left-hand side, basically continuing, and again, just an all-purpose dual carriageway, a green road, not a blue one, coming all the way down through the goods yard and terminating on Gallowgate down here towards London Road. And you would have had some surface street changes to take you all the way around here to south of the river.
Interesting that is somebody mentioned about tunnels. A lot of that's in tunnel with the plaza area on top of it, so opening that area out.
This image on the right-hand side here, you can see the cathedral there, the Royal Infirmary there. They were going to create this plaza around about the Barony Church and the Province Lordship, hide the road completely underground to try and improve that. And we've included it there in sections. So here's the Royal Infirmary. You can see the traffic would go down underground, all the way under here, and would only emerge at Duke Street, next to the high-rise flats that are there.
Yeah.
Okay. Finishing up then before we take some questions, because I'm conscious of time. Outcomes, what did we get? We got a half-finished inner ring road that has still enabled traffic in the city centre to reach far lower levels than it was even in 1960. 80% reduction in 1972 of traffic going through the city when it opened. In 2015, traffic in the city centre remained 30% less than it was in 1960. Glasgow as a city centre is one of the least congested city centres in Britain, and it has the lowest proportion of HGV traffic on the city streets. So if you look at, if you're in the city centre or you're in any of the roads round about, you will very rarely see a heavy goods vehicle, a full-size truck on a city street. You will see vans and things obviously making deliveries, but you won't see that, strategic traffic.
We look at benefits, and it actually allowed for streets like Sauchiehall Hall Street, Argyle Street, Buchanan Street to be pedestrianised as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was a key aim.
It brought in parking charges too, didn't it?
So people think that again that it was all about the car, but it wasn't really, because it brought in parking charges on street, reduced the number of on-street spaces. They were looking at bringing in bus priority measures as well at that time. Crucially, what they did was they planted multi-storey car parks around the circumference of the city centre. The intention being that you would come off the motorway and park, and then you would make the rest of the journey into the city centre on foot. They didn't want traffic in the city centre. That was key to the whole thing. It really wasn't about that. Finally, there I've put a slide up to say, could it ever have been completed? So, the ring road, could it ever have been completed? Yes, but I think it would needed to have been about 10 years earlier than it actually was.
That's right. There was a point in time that everything came together to allow you to do this, as Stuart was saying, with these comprehensive redevelopment areas. However, attitudes just changed in the 70s towards this. Although we did still build an urban motorway in 2011, which was the M74 completion, but
certainly not on the same scale
with the whole scale of everything. If you look at the entire highway plan document that you can see on our website, to build that all within the space of time that existed, I don't think it could have.
Crucially, after 1973, and particularly after 1975, funding went first. Then the political will started to ebb away, and the public support just wasn't there for it. I think the Townhead to London Road link could have been built and was very feasible and wouldn't have been too controversial, and would actually have improved the situation in High Street quite considerably.
The problem is at top of High Street and at Castle Street and so on is you've described it, Stuart, as a traffic sewer. It would have tidied that whole situation up. So in hindsight, we got half of it, but we didn't get the half that was supposed to take most of the traffic, which is why we've got all the congestion we have today. Okay. Well, I think it moves us on to questions. I'm very conscious of the time some of them might answer. So
on that note, if you do want to get more detail on any of this, please check out our website, the social media feeds, and crucially, we have a podcast series as well, which actually covers a lot of these issues in depth. All right. So, John, questions? Do we have any?
Somebody asked if this will be available online later, and I think we found out yes, it will be.
Yes, it will be. It'll be available via Doors Open Days YouTube feed, via their social media, and we might try and we'll share it as well when they do. So it will be available later.
That's fine. So somebody asks here, do you think a future northern bypass motorway from the northern end of the Erskine Bridge to where the M80 meets the M876 at Denny would reduce the amount of traffic going through the city centre from the west of the country to the north?
Crucially, that was proposed in the highway plan. It was known as the Northlink Motorway and the Lomond Motorway, and that would have connected the M8 at Steps Road with the A82 just east of Erskine Bridge.
Drumchapel.
Drumchapel,
In the Greater Glasgow Transportation Study, they did look at the route that's been asked about in this question, and that was called as the Campsie Expressway, and it would have gone from Dalnotto at the Erskine Bridge all the way over to
Cumbernauld,
Cumbernauld.
at the M80. And likewise, there was proposals for southern motorways as well. I mean, the inner ring road was only supposed to be one piece of a much larger puzzle. But the same reasons, you know, the same things that affected the completion of the ring road tended to affect the completion of the rest of the network, although they were far less controversial, these outer routes, because at that time they were going through agricultural land, empty land. It would have been far easier to build them. But as I say, because the money that was being made available by central government at that time crucially was aimed towards urban redevelopment, that's why the corporation jumped and did all their inner city stuff first.
But to answer, would it reduce traffic? Of course it would. You know, it's something that, you know, I'd like to see, you know. The next question I've got here is from Craig. Craig says, great presentation. Sorry if you've already mentioned this, but I wasn't able to catch everything. I'd be interested to know which aspect you think the planners got most right and conversely most wrong.
I think what they got wrong was the original line for the east flank of the ring road. We know that the engineers told them that it was going to be controversial. Halfords told them, the corporation in particular, that it was going to be controversial and it was going to be very difficult to get it.
A hard sell.
Yeah, it was going to be a hard sell. I think the corporation made the mistake of pushing for that rather than taking the engineers' advice in the early 60s when they had the opportunity to come up with something that would have been far more acceptable. What did they get right? I think they built in enough capacity in it to ensure that it continues to work well today. A lot of cities in Britain built smaller scale routes and they suffer much more than us.
Plantation interchange is a good example of providing a lot of capacity at the time for future.
So M8 junction 28 to 22.
So that's where your M77, M8 and M74 collide.
Yeah, so that they got that right. The other thing they got right was appointing a consulting architect, because that means that Glasgow's motorway system looks far better than if you look at Manchester's equivalent, Birmingham's equivalent. You look at these cities, you'll see these bare concrete walls with no finish, very dull and drab, structures finished to not a particular high standard. Everything in Glasgow had to be considered. You know, you've got nice, you know, precast aggregate walls. The sign gantries were designed to be very minimalist. The high mass lighting, you know, the masonry clad walls at Town Head, all of these things were things that didn't have to be done, but were done in a way that the corporation wanted it to try and fit in with the existing cityscape as much as possible. And that's something Glasgow should be applauded for.
Absolutely. I think it is something they got right. I agree. We do have another question here. It says, sorry I missed the beginning of the presentation, but was an orbital motorway ever considered similar to the M25, which circulates?
Yes. Many orbital motorways. The inner ring road was just one of them. There were two others. An intermediate one, which utilised the Clyde Tunnel and Crow Road Expressway and various other things, and the Lomond Motorway, Maryhill Motorway. And then there would have been an outer motorway as well, which would have taken you from Cumbernauld to Hamilton to Paisley around the south of East Kilbride and Barrhead, and then around Paisley, across the Erskine Bridge, and from the Erskine Bridge all the way back to Cumbernauld via that Campsie Expressway. They had multiple outer bypasses proposed, but the money just wasn't there for it. The funding fell away. The change of government in 1979 in particular led to a further reduction in public spending available to local authorities, who at that time were the main drivers of new roads proposals in the Glasgow conurbation. It wasn't like now where you've got a central body like Transport Scotland who lead on trunk road proposals. The councils were very much the lead with a lot of these things. The Scottish Office were involved, absolutely. But, you know, it was more on the councils to do it and drive it forward and push it. And as I say, after 75, political will kind of changed. Now, after 79, there just wasn't any money. Although, as we mentioned, the Greater Glasgow Transportation Study looked at both public and private transportation, considered them all against one another. So you do want to really look at our website and listen to the podcast for all the detail.
Yeah, I know. The podcast is basically this, but every couple of weeks.
Okay. Final question, I think.
Final
I think we'll get time for one more. I will say at this point, if there's other questions that we don't answer, we'll answer them and we'll publish them on our social media. And I know the Doors Open Days guys said that they'll try and make them available as well.
It's not really a question, but it's something you can read out. Okay. Somebody put here, this is from Robert Strain. He says, great double act. Thank you.
Thank you.
Informative and entertaining. He says he still hates cars, still hates the destruction caused. All the main city crosses, thus communities. In fact, do you have the name and address of the guy who demolished my house at George's Cross?
Well, that's
afraid we don't.
It's glad to see that it's still dividing opinion 50 years later. It is a very divisive issue.
I'm glad we brought all this out.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some good conversations that go on, and importantly, people really enjoy what we put because it shows Glasgow the way it was as well.
Yeah, and you know, that's the problem with urban motorways. There is no one urban motorway that you can build that will be entirely positive. The benefits are almost entirely outweighed by the disbenefits, the increased noise, increased traffic, and things like that. Yeah, nowadays you can bury them, you can put them in tunnels, and that would have a far less impact or lower impact on the community. But again, what we always say, put yourself in the context of the time. It's easy to look back after 60 years and go, that's terrible. But if you think in 1960, then looking back at 1900, think of the changes that had taken place. In that
people
time.
had similar attitudes towards the railways being built in Victorian times, and that severance and destruction they caused.
Yeah, and the engineers, as we mentioned before, using things like former canals and things like that, the engineers were conscious of the potential severance issues. They were trying, but as we say, it was never going to be entirely positive. Although we think that the benefits, and one thing I didn't mention was it was estimated in 2015 by a study, a technical paper, that the motorway through Glasgow had saved 10,000 serious injury accidents and between 800 and 1,000 fatalities just by getting traffic off the city centre streets.
Well, it kind of ties in with the question somebody has asked here, designed to accommodate traffic to the 1990s, which is highway plan. How successful, and is it still fit for purpose?
Yes, it is.
Well, we're beyond 1990 now. So traffic levels have exceeded, but they did make these predictions based on the whole network being built.
Yeah, the predictions made in 1960 were found to be almost 100% accurate.
Yeah,
they have to be commended for that. They had no computers, they had no digital counters. They were doing it all by hand and by interview. And those projections, and the good example is 100,000 vehicles a day at Townhead and 120,000 vehicles a day in the Kingston Bridge. That was